Let's talk about what happens when you've done the work. When you've gone through the fire of the dynamic, developed genuine self-possession, invested in your own life, stopped chasing and stopped performing, and started genuinely living. When you've reached the place where you actually have your own ground to stand on, your own life to inhabit, your own worth that doesn't depend on anyone else's assessment or availability, at that point, something changes in how the avoidant relates to you. Not just in the dynamic, in their internal assessment of who you are and what you represent. You've become something their system wasn't expecting, someone they can't manage, someone whose ground isn't available to take, someone who has the self-possession to walk away if the relationship isn't working, and who has demonstrated that this willingness is real. That's threatening to an avoidant, not threatening in the way that emotional demand is threatening. They know how to manage that. Threatening in a different way, the threat of actually losing something valuable, of encountering someone who might actually leave rather than staying regardless of how they're treated, of realizing that the usual dynamic in which they hold all the cards is no longer the dynamic on the table. And when an avoidant feels that specific kind of threatened, that vulnerable to loss, they reach for one last tactic. Not the withdrawal, they've already used that and it didn't work the way they expected. Not the distancing. You handled that, they reach for something more subtle. Something designed to bring you back into the position they can manage without requiring them to actually change. The one tactic that, if you don't see it clearly, can undo years of growth in a single conversation. That's what today's video is about. The last dirty trick. What it looks like, why it works, and how to make sure it doesn't work on you. Understanding why your strength is threatening to the avoidance system. The avoidance attachment system was built around a specific model of how relationships work. In that model, the avoidant manages distance and the other person manages the consequences of that distance. The anxiety, the pursuit, the ongoing effort to maintain the connection across the avoidance cycles of withdrawal. In this model, the avoidant has the control. The other person has the need. And that asymmetry, however uncomfortable it is to acknowledge, is part of what makes the dynamic feel manageable to the avoidant. They're not at the mercy of the relationship the way the other person is. They can leave, or threaten to leave, or simply go cold, and the relationship will adjust around them because the other person needs it enough to absorb the cost. Your strength disrupts this model at the most fundamental level. When you've developed genuine self-possession, when you actually don't need them to stay in order to be okay, the asymmetry disappears. You're no longer the person who absorbs the cost. You're someone who can evaluate the cost honestly and decide whether it's worth paying. And you've demonstrated, through your behavior over the period since you started this work, that when the cost isn't worth it, you don't pay it. You redirect. You invest in yourself. You demonstrate through your actual choices that you are not held in this relationship by need. That demonstration is what the avoidance system reads as too strong. Not a judgment about your actual worth, a threat assessment. Their system reads your strength as the thing most likely to produce the outcome their attachment system is most afraid of. Genuine loss of a connection they care about to someone who doesn't need them enough to stay regardless of how they're treated. This is the moment the dirty trick appears. Because their system, faced with this specific kind of threat, does something specific. It doesn't respond with genuine change. That would require more work than the moment can produce. It responds with the tactic that has historically been most effective at drawing people back into accessible positions. The tactic that looks from the outside like vulnerability, but isn't. The dirty trick. What it actually is, let me name it clearly, because clarity is what protects you from it. The dirty trick is performed vulnerability. The sudden strategic disclosure of depth, feeling, or need at precisely the moment when genuine vulnerability would most effectively interrupt your forward momentum and pull you back into the position of caring for and accommodating the avoidance emotional world. Here's what it looks like in practice. You've been doing your work. You've been redirecting, investing in your life, maintaining genuine distance. The avoidant has been watching, from their side in their own way, as the dynamic they were comfortable in fails to reassert. They can see that you're genuinely moving on, that the version of you who was absorbing their management is being replaced by a version that is building something real and independent. And in that observation, something in their system activates, the fear of permanent loss. And in response to that fear, they reach, but not with the tentative, authentic quality of a genuine reconnection bid. They reach with something that hits you directly in your specific vulnerability, your capacity for care, your genuine attunement, your real concern for their well-being, and your real investment in them as a person. They might tell you something about themselves they've never shared before. Something that sounds like genuine opening, like finally trusting you with something real, like the breakthrough of intimacy that you've been hoping for. They might express feelings in a way that is uncharacteristically direct, telling you what you meant to them, acknowledging something about the dynamic in a way that sounds like insight. They might present themselves as struggling, vulnerable, uncertain, in a way that activates every empathic instinct you have and pulls you toward them from a place of genuine care. The trick is, it's not in service of genuine change. It's in service of re-establishing the dynamic in which you're organized around them. How to tell the difference between real vulnerability and the trick? This is the hardest part, because the dirty trick is convincing. It's convincing precisely because it's activating real feelings in you, real care, real empathy, real hope that this is the opening you've been waiting for. And because the avoidant may not even be fully conscious that they're deploying a tactic, their system is doing what it does to manage the threat of loss. The expression of vulnerability may feel real to them in the moment. That doesn't make it the beginning of genuine change. The way to tell the difference is this: watch what follows, not what they say in the moment, what they do in the days and weeks after. Genuine vulnerability that leads somewhere is the beginning of a consistent change in pattern. The avoidant who is genuinely opening up doesn't do it once in a moment of crisis and then return to the same patterns. They do it repeatedly, gradually, sustainedly. They show up differently, not just when they feel the threat of your leaving, but in the ordinary moments of the relationship. They demonstrate, through accumulated behavior over time, that the opening wasn't a bid, it was a shift. The dirty trick doesn't have this follow-through. It produces an opening that re-establishes your availability, and once your availability is re-established, the familiar patterns return. The warmth cools, the distance reasserts. The vulnerability disappears until the next time the threat of your leaving activates it again. The pattern is: crisis produces expression, produces your renewed engagement, produces the return to comfortable distance. Repeat indefinitely. If you've been in this dynamic for any length of time, you may recognize this pattern. You may have seen it before. The expression of feeling that pulled you back in, followed by the gradual return to the same dynamic, followed by the same distance. The dirty trick doesn't produce a different outcome. It produces the same cycle with a different opening act each time. Why your strength specifically activates this tactic? The reason the dirty trick appears precisely when you've become strong is not accidental. It's a function of what the avoidance system reads as the specific threat that strength represents. When you were in pursuit, when you were reaching, being available, demonstrating your need for the connection, the avoidance deactivating system had plenty of material to work with. Your pursuit justified the distance. Your availability made the distance comfortable, the dynamic was running on the familiar track, and the avoidance system, while never fully comfortable, was managing it. Your strength removes the material, it removes the justification, the comfort, the familiar asymmetry. And the avoidance system, finding itself without the usual management resources, reaches for the one resource that bypasses your defenses: your genuine heart, your genuine care for them as a person, your genuine hope that the depth you sensed in them is going to finally become available. The dirty trick targets exactly what is most alive in you. It targets your best qualities, your empathy, your capacity for hope, your genuine investment in this person's well-being. That's why it's so effective. That's why it can undo in one conversation what it took months to build. And that's why recognizing it clearly, naming it, holding it at enough distance to evaluate it honestly rather than just feeling into it, is so important. Not to close yourself off, not to become hardened or defensive, but to maintain enough clarity to distinguish between a genuine opening that deserves your full engagement and a tactic that deserves compassionate but firm recognition. The response that protects everything you've built. Here's how to respond when you recognize the dirty trick happening. You don't need to be cold, you don't need to be clinical or accusatory, or to explain your read of what's happening in a way that will immediately activate the avoidance defensiveness. You don't need to say, "I see what you're doing and it won't work." That's the wrong register. The right register is warm, genuine, and completely grounded in your own life. It sounds like, "I hear what you're saying and I care about you as a person. I also know what I need from a relationship, and I'm not available to engage in a way that doesn't include the possibility of real change. The warmth is genuine because you do care. The boundary is genuine because you actually have one now, and the combination of the two, warmth and real limit, is the response that the dirty trick has no good answer for. Here's why. The dirty trick is designed to pull you back into the familiar dynamic by activating your care. But if your care comes with a real limit, if the warmth is accompanied by genuine willingness to not engage, unless things are different, then the trick can't achieve its goal. It can't re-establish you as the person absorbing the cost without reciprocity, because you're warm, but you're genuinely not in that position anymore. The avoidance system, encountering this response, either rises to meet it or doesn't. If it rises, if the expression of vulnerability was the beginning of something genuine that they're now willing to substantiate with behavioral change, then the warmth you offered creates the space for that development. If it doesn't rise, if the pattern returns to distance once the trick has failed to produce the expected result, then you've protected everything you built without having to sacrifice the warmth that makes you who you are. Both outcomes serve you. In both outcomes, you maintain your integrity, your standards, and your self-possession. In both outcomes, you engage with the avoidant as someone who genuinely cares and genuinely knows their own worth. That's the position from which every good relationship outcome is possible, and every bad one is survivable. The internal state that makes this possible. I want to be honest with you about what it takes to respond to the dirty trick with warmth and real limit simultaneously, because it requires an internal state that doesn't come from information alone. It requires being genuinely okay in yourself, independent of the outcome with this person. And that genuine okayness, the actual embodied lived version of it, not the performed version, is what you've been building throughout this process. The life you've invested in, the self-possession you've developed, the capacity you've built for regulating your own attachment alarm rather than always needing to resolve it through action. The relationships you've deepened, the work you've done on understanding your own patterns, the whole arc of development that this dynamic, navigated with intention, has been producing in you. That development is what makes the response possible, not information about the dirty trick. The internal state that information points toward. Without the internal state, all the clarity about what the trick is doesn't help. Because when it activates your genuine care for this person, knowing it's a tactic doesn't make you feel less. It still feels like hope. It still feels like the opening you've been waiting for. And without the genuine okayness underneath, the real capacity to be in the warmth without needing the outcome, the knowledge collapses under the feeling. With the internal state, everything is different. You can feel the warmth and the hope and the genuine care, and still hold your ground. You can be moved by their vulnerability without being swept away by it. You can engage fully, warmly, with your whole self present, and still be someone who knows exactly what they need and what they won't accept. The two things coexist. That coexistence is the specific quality that the dirty trick can't defeat. It's the quality you've been building the whole time. What this moment is actually asking of you, the dirty trick, whatever form it takes with this specific avoidant, is ultimately asking you one question: will you return to the position of absorbing the dynamic's cost in order to maintain the connection? Your answer, grounded in everything you've built, is no. Not from bitterness, not from spite, from genuine self-knowledge. From the clear-eyed recognition that you deserve a relationship that doesn't require you to quietly sacrifice your own well-being in order to function. From the genuine hard-won understanding that your worth is not negotiable, and that your availability is not unconditional. That no, delivered warmly without drama from a place of genuine self-possession, is the most powerful thing you can say at this moment. Not because it will necessarily produce the outcome you want with this specific person, but because saying it, meaning it, standing in it, is an act of genuine self-respect that changes you. That makes the no more available the next time it's needed. That reinforces the foundation you've been building rather than undermining it at the moment it's most tested. The moment when the dirty trick appears is the final test of the work you've done. It's the point at which everything is on the line. The dynamic is asking, one more time, whether you'll return to the old position. And your response to it, grounded, warm, non-negotiable, is the answer that determines whether the growth you've achieved is real or whether it collapses at the first sign of genuine pressure. Trust what you've built. Trust the work you've done. Trust the version of yourself that emerged from navigating this dynamic with intention and self-knowledge. That person knows exactly what to do here. They already know the answer. They've known it for a while. Stand in it. Let it be real. And see what the avoidant is willing to build with the person who won't return to the position of absorbing cost without reciprocity. What they're able to offer the genuinely whole, genuinely self-possessed version of you is the only version of this connection worth having. And if they're not able to offer it, you'll be someone who held their ground and found out. That knowledge is worth more than the uncertainty of never having asked for what you actually need. You already have everything this moment requires. Use it. The anatomy of the trick, breaking down how it works step by step. Let me walk you through the exact mechanics of how this tactic typically unfolds. Because if you've never had it named clearly, you may have experienced it multiple times without recognizing it as a pattern. And recognizing it as a pattern, not just as this specific incident with this specific person, but as a consistent feature of the avoidance management toolkit, changes your capacity to respond to it from clarity rather than confusion. Step 1. You reach a point of genuine self-possession. This can happen gradually, or it can arrive at a specific recognizable moment. But at some point in the process of doing your own work, the avoidant registers that you're different. You're not reaching, you're not performing availability. You're genuinely invested in your own life, and this is visible to them even at a distance in the specific quality of your presence and absence. The emotional atmosphere has shifted. Something has changed. And whatever has changed is moving the dynamic in a direction their system reads as danger. Step 2. Their system escalates. The fear of genuine loss, different from the ordinary anxiety their deactivating strategies are designed to manage, begins to activate. They start to notice, and eventually cannot stop noticing, that the connection they were comfortably treating as a deferrable resource is not as deferrable as they assumed, that you may actually be gone, and not come back. Step 3. The tactic deploys, not as a conscious decision in most cases, as an impulse, a reach that's driven more by urgency than by considered intention. They say something genuine sounding. They acknowledge something about the dynamic in a way that sounds like insight and creates the impression that the breakthrough you've been hoping for is finally happening. The content varies. Every avoidance version is slightly different based on what they know your specific vulnerability to hope is, but the structure is the same. Express depth that activates your care and creates the conditions for your renewed engagement. Step 4. You respond. If you don't recognize what's happening, you respond with the full warmth of someone who has been waiting for exactly this. The care floods back in. The hope activates. The availability reestablishes. And the avoidance system, which had been managing the threat of your genuine departure, receives what it was reaching for. Confirmation that the connection is still accessible. That you're still there. That the distance they're comfortable with is still available to them because you haven't fully left. Step 5. The pattern returns. Once the availability is re-established, the urgency that produced the expression of vulnerability subsides. The motivation for continued opening, which was the threat of your departure, has been resolved by your renewed presence. And without that motivation, the deactivating strategies reassert. The warmth that appeared in step 3 begins to fade. The distance that the trick was designed to prevent your creating returns. The cycle continues. This is the anatomy. Recognizing it, being able to trace your own previous experiences with this pattern through this lens, is the first step toward not allowing step 4 to proceed the way it has before. The specific forms the trick takes, and how to recognize each one, the dirty trick doesn't always look the same. It adapts to what the avoidant knows about you, your specific vulnerabilities, your specific hopes, the specific things you've been most hungry for in the relationship. Let me walk through the most common forms so you can recognize whichever version shows up with your specific avoidant. The first form is the sudden declaration. This is the most obvious version. The avoidant says something about their feelings for you that they've never said before. Maybe they explicitly name the connection as important. Maybe they use language that implies commitment or depth that has been absent. Maybe they acknowledge missing you or tell you something about what you mean to them in a way that feels like the words you've been waiting to hear for months or years. The sudden declaration is specifically calibrated to arrive at the moment when your departure seems most imminent, when you've been most clearly gone from the position of availability they rely on. And its suddenness is part of what makes it feel significant. If they're saying this now, after all this time, it must mean something is finally breaking open. What to watch for? Whether the declaration changes anything in the actual texture of the relationship, whether the warmth that accompanied it persists through the ordinary moments or only appears when the threat of your leaving reactivates, whether what was declared becomes visible in behavior over time or remains exclusively in words. The second form is the shared vulnerability. The avoidant tells you something about themselves, their history, their struggles, their fears that they haven't shared before. Something that sounds like trust, like finally letting you in past the defenses that have always been present. This is particularly effective with empaths and with people who have been specifically hungry for the avoidant's inner life, because it appears to offer exactly what was most missing: genuine access to who the avoidant really is beneath the armor. What to watch for. Whether the shared vulnerability is the beginning of a consistently more open relational posture, or whether it was the specific piece deployed in the specific moment of threat and nothing further is shared without another threat to activate it. Genuine vulnerability in an avoidant who is genuinely opening is followed by more vulnerability, gradually, unevenly, but with a direction of movement toward more access over time. The tactic version is a one-off, the specific disclosure that was needed, followed by the return to the usual closed posture. The third form is the acknowledgement of their own patterns. The avoidant says something about their own avoidance, something that suggests self-awareness, insight, understanding of what they've been doing in the dynamic and how it's affected you. They might say, "I know I've been pushing you away," or "I realize I've been doing the thing I always do." Or some version of, "I see what my patterns have cost this relationship." This is perhaps the most powerful form of the trick, because it appears to offer the thing that's been most needed for genuine change to be possible: the avoidant's own honest reckoning with their behavior. What to watch for. Whether the acknowledgement produces any change in behavior, whether what was seen is acted on, whether the pattern they named continues or shifts. Genuine insight in an avoidant, real self-awareness that is in service of actual change, produces different behavior, not immediately or perfectly, but measurably over time in the specific domain that was acknowledged. The tactic version acknowledges the pattern without changing it, because the acknowledgement itself was the intervention, the move that secured your continued engagement, and actual change wasn't the goal. When the trick breaks you open, what to do in the moment? Let me be real with you about something. Even if you know all of this, even if you can name the pattern, even if you've been through it before, when the trick deploys, it can still break you open, because what it's activating is real. Your care for this person is real. Your hope that they're capable of more is real. Your genuine desire for the depth you've seen glimpses of to become sustained and available, that's real. The trick works by activating real things. So what do you do in the moment when you feel yourself flooded, when the hope activates and the care rushes back, and the part of you that has been waiting for this is ready to let everything go and just receive what's being offered? You pause. That's the first thing. Not coldly, not dramatically. You simply don't respond immediately. You take the time you need, hours if necessary, to move from the flooded state into the grounded state. Not to suppress what you're feeling, to let what you're feeling coexist with what you know, to allow the hope and the care and the genuine warmth to be present without requiring you to immediately act from them. In that pause, you ask yourself one question, not, "Is this real?" You can't know that immediately from a single expression. The question is, does this require anything of me that I'm not willing to give on the current terms of the dynamic? If their expression is genuine, you can engage warmly without immediately reorganizing your whole life around it. Genuine opening doesn't require you to immediately return to full availability. It invites you to respond with warmth and to see what develops. If it's the trick, your response of warm engagement without full return to the previous dynamic will reveal that, because the trick specifically requires you to return to the previous position to achieve its goal. You don't have to know in the moment which it is. You just have to not give more than the moment actually warrants. Warmth is warranted. Curiosity is warranted. Hope, in small and honest doses, is warranted. Immediate reorganization of your entire emotional world around a single expression, that's not warranted. Wait for more. Let the investment be proportional to what has been demonstrated. The conversation you may need to have. There may be a point at which the most honest and self-respecting response to what's happening is a direct conversation, not about the tactic. You don't need to explain your psychological read of their behavior, but about what you need, about what a genuine engagement with you requires at this point in your development. That conversation, from the grounded version of yourself, sounds something like this. "I care about you genuinely, and I'm open to seeing where this goes. And I also know myself well enough now to be clear about what I need in order to invest in this connection. I need to see consistent change in behavior, not just expression of feeling. I need the patterns that made this dynamic unsustainable to actually shift, not just be named. I'm not asking for perfection. I'm asking for genuine effort and genuine change over time. If that's what you're offering, I'm interested. If not, I care enough about both of us to be honest that this isn't going to work. That conversation is honest, warm, clear, and completely fair. It doesn't punish the avoidant for the tactic. It doesn't require them to be different than they are. It simply names what you need and invites them to either meet it or be honest that they can't. And then, and this is the crucial part, you hold to it, not as a test, as a genuine statement of what you require. If the behavior doesn't change, you don't keep adjusting the standard to accommodate the gap. You allow the consequence you named to be real. This is the integrity that the dirty trick can't operate inside. It can only work in a dynamic where the other person's standards are ultimately flexible, where the expression of vulnerability produces enough hope to override the standard again. When the standard is genuinely held, the trick fails at its fundamental purpose. And the avoidant is faced with a genuine choice: do the actual work of change, or genuinely lose someone who was worth keeping. Protecting your heart without closing it. One more thing that deserves saying, because it's the thing most people get wrong when they've been through enough dirty tricks to be genuinely hurt by them. The protection you need is not the protection of a closed heart, not the protection of cynicism, of refusing to hope, of deciding that because you've been hurt before, you won't allow yourself to be open again. That kind of protection costs more than it saves. It turns you into someone who is defended against exactly the kind of genuine connection that is worth having, defended in ways that make the genuine thing, when it appears, impossible to receive. The protection you need is the protection of genuine self-knowledge, of knowing clearly enough what you need and what you require, that you can engage with full openness and still not lose yourself when the dynamic tries to pull you back into positions that don't serve you. The protection of having a stable enough relationship with your own worth that hope doesn't override self-respect. The protection of being grounded enough in your own life that even in the middle of genuine care and genuine hope, you can stay rooted in what you know. That's the protection, not armor, ground, not less heart, more self, more clarity, more honest relationship with your own needs alongside your genuine openness to theirs. The avoidant who is capable of genuine change needs you to have that protection, because they need someone who won't abandon their own needs in order to accommodate the dynamic, because that accommodation is part of what made the dynamic unsustainable for both of them. And the avoidant who isn't capable of genuine change needs you to have it even more, because without it, you'll absorb the cost of their limitations indefinitely. Either way, the protection serves you. The heart that's open and grounded is the only heart that can receive something genuinely worth having. Keep your heart open, keep your ground solid, let them coexist. That's the answer to the dirty trick. And it's the answer to everything that comes after it. The pattern that repeats until you break it. I want to spend some time on the repetitive nature of this tactic, because one of the most disorienting things about being in the avoidant dynamic is the way the same moments seem to come around again and again. The same distance, the same hope that something is changing, the same expression that feels different this time, the same gradual return to the familiar pattern. If you've experienced this cycle, you know how exhausting it is. And more than exhausting, how destabilizing. Each cycle starts the hope clock over. Each expression of vulnerability from the avoidant restores your investment in the connection's potential. Each return to the familiar distance erodes something in you that takes time to rebuild. And over the course of multiple cycles, the erosion accumulates. You start to distrust your own perception. You start to wonder whether you're imagining the patterns. You start to feel like you're going crazy in a very specific way. The way that comes from being told, implicitly, through the structure of the dynamic, that your read of what's happening isn't accurate. The cycle continues until someone breaks it. And the only person positioned to break it from the outside of the avoidance system is you. Not by changing the avoidant, by changing what you're willing to accept. Breaking the cycle doesn't require a dramatic exit or a definitive ending. It requires holding to the standard I described in the previous section, warmth and real limit, simultaneously through enough iterations of the dynamic to actually test whether the avoidant is capable of meeting it. You hold the limit not as a weapon and not as a test you're secretly hoping they fail, You hold it as honest information about what you need, offered clearly and maintained genuinely. And you watch what happens, not with crossed arms or strategic distance, but with genuine openness that is also genuinely boundaried. If the cycle breaks, if the avoidant faced with a limit that is genuinely held rather than ultimately flexible rises to meet it, you'll know. The behavioral change will be visible. Slow perhaps, imperfect certainly, but real and directional, moving consistently toward a different kind of engagement. That's what breaking the cycle looks like from a position of genuine change. If the cycle doesn't break, if the standard is acknowledged and then ignored, if the expression of vulnerability was the end of the movement rather than the beginning, you'll know that too. And knowing it clearly, without the ambiguity that the cycle usually maintains, is information you need to make the decision that's actually best for you. Not the decision you wish were right, but the one that actually serves your well-being. The cycle can only continue if you keep absorbing the cost of its continuation. Stopping that absorption, with warmth, with genuine care, but with real consequence, is the specific act that breaks it. You have that capacity. You've been building it. Now is the moment to use it. What comes after? The two paths, when you hold your ground through the dirty trick, two things can happen. Let me describe both clearly so you know what you're actually choosing between. Path 1. The avoidant rises to meet you. They discover, in the experience of someone who genuinely cares about them and who is genuinely not available to continue the dynamic on the old terms, that they want the connection enough to do the work it requires. They begin to show up differently, not perfectly, not consistently from day one, but with genuine effort and genuine intention. They seek their own support for their patterns. They bring self-awareness to moments when their old responses emerge. They demonstrate, over time, through accumulated evidence, that the expression of vulnerability wasn't just a tactic but the beginning of a real movement. If this happens, you'll have something worth having. A relationship that was tested and shows itself. A partner who, when presented with the honest truth of what you need, chose to develop toward it rather than away from it. A dynamic that has a real foundation rather than one person's accommodation of the other's limitations. That's a genuinely good thing, worth the hard work of getting here. Path 2. The avoidant doesn't rise to meet you. The expression of vulnerability runs its course. The availability it was designed to re-establish either isn't granted or is granted and then gradually withdrawn from again, and the pattern returns to what it was. In this path, you're left with clarity. Painful clarity, but real. The clarity that this specific person, at this specific point in their development, is not able to give you what you need. That the potential you perceived in them may be real, may genuinely be there, but is not currently accessible in the form of a sustainable relationship with you. In this path, the most self-respecting response is to allow the ending to actually end, not to manage the avoidance feelings about the ending, not to stay available in case they change, but to genuinely redirect back to the life you've been building, into the development you've been doing, and let the connection be what it was, rather than what you were hoping it would become. Both paths ask the same thing of you, to hold the ground you've built and to respond to what's actually happening, rather than to what you wish were happening. In path 1, that means staying in your groundedness through the reconnection and building something genuinely different from a position of genuine equality. In path 2, it means allowing yourself to grieve what didn't work and to invest the energy of that grief into the next chapter of your own life. Neither path is easy. Both paths are good, both paths preserve your integrity and serve your genuine well-being. And both paths are available to you right now. What you choose and how you hold it is what determines which one you actually walk. The final word on strength and what it demands. Here's the thing about being the strong version of yourself that the avoidant perceives as threatening. It demands something from you that the weaker version didn't. The weaker version, the one that absorbed, accommodated, hoped, and waited, didn't require much of you beyond endurance. You endured the dynamic because you cared, and because the potential felt real, and because you hadn't yet developed the self-possession to require more. Endurance is painful, but it doesn't require much beyond the capacity to keep bearing the cost. Strength requires something different. It requires you to be honest with yourself and with the avoidant about what you actually need. It requires you to hold that honesty even when the costs of holding it are visible and real. It requires you to be genuinely okay with outcomes that are different from what you want, because genuine okayness is the foundation of genuine limits. You can't hold a limit you're not genuinely willing to see produce its consequence, and you can't be genuinely willing to see the consequence if you're not genuinely okay, in yourself, in your own life, without this specific connection. Strength in this specific context means having done enough of the work of your own development that you are not dependent on this outcome, that your well-being doesn't live in the avoidant's hands, that the consequence of holding your limit, however that consequence lands, is something you can live well with. That's the demand. It's a real one. And meeting it is the work you've been doing the whole time you've been navigating this dynamic. Every time you redirected instead of pursued. Every time you invested in your own life instead of managing theirs. Every time you sat with uncertainty without resolving it through reach. You were building the specific capacity that this moment requires. You have it. The work has been producing it. The person who can hold strength and warmth simultaneously, who can say, I care about you and I require what I require, and mean both parts with equal genuineness. That person is who you've been becoming. You're already there. Trust it. Use it. Let the avoidance see the full truth of who you've become and see what they're able to offer in return. The answer to that question is the only information that matters now, and you're strong enough to receive whatever answer arrives. That's everything. Go live from the ground you've built. You earned this. Don't give it back. You've come too far to go back now. And you don't have to.